400 grams of all-purpose flour or bread flour. Sometimes I add wheat flour, half a teaspoon of salt, a quarter teaspoon of active dry yeast, 2 teaspoons of white sugar, mix the dry ingredients. Add 300 milliliter of warm water. Mix all up until there is no dry flour and it looks like a wet pile of dough. This takes about 2 to 3 minutes of mixing. That's all you need to do for now. This bread recipe requires time with minimal effort. Then cover and let the dough rest at room temperature for about 3 hours or more. For this bread, I will be leaving it to rest overnight. This dough have been resting on my kitchen table for about 10 hours. I made 2 bread dough last night, and I will be baking 1 regular bread and 1 raisin bread. It's time to mix the dough so the yeast have new food to feed. This is similar to punch down. After a quick mix, I will cover and let it rest again for about 3 hours or longer depending on my schedule. If I don't have time in about 3 or 4 hours, I like to do a quick mix when I get a chance so the yeast get new food. If I leave the dough for too long without mixing, the yeast don't have enough food to feed on and it starts to ferment, which does not make the bread taste or smell good. It has been 3 hours and the dough has raised to about double its size. It's almost time to bake the bread. Use a spatula to scrape the dough into a greased baking pan. You can use parchment paper in the pan, but I prefer to just add a bit of oil so it is easier to take the bread out when it is baked. The pan size I am using is about 9 by 5 by 2.5 inches tall. This is the plain bread my family likes. My son and I like raisin bread more, so I like to add about 1 cup of raisins. Of course, my son prefers more raisins, but I find 1 cup would give a nice balance of bread and raisins ratio. Incorporate the raisins into the dough and mix it nicely so there is no clumps of raisins in one area. This simple recipe needs a minimum of 6 hours for the flour to develop the flavor and gluten, with a mixing of the dough about 3 hours or longer after it is initially formed. Pour it into a greased pan, and I like to pull the dough over the raisins on the surface so the raisins don't get burned too much when it is baked. Put the dough into a preheated oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit and bake it for 50 minutes. I place the dough on the lower rack to avoid too much heat from the heating coil at the top. If you have a bigger oven, place it in the middle rack. My house smells so good right now. Here are the almost done breads. I have about 1 minute plus to go till it's done. The breads are done. Take it out and let it rest about 10 minutes. If you try to take the bread out of the baking pan now, it may break apart. It has been about 10 minutes and I am going to try to take it out of the pan. I am using a knife to loosen the sides so it is easier to take the bread out. The bread is still hot, Smells really good and has a nice crusty top. It should come out easily. There it is. Still very hot. I put the bread upside down to let the heat evaporate. If I leave the bread in the pan for too long, the steam will dampen the bread and I will lose the crustiness of the bread. Here's the raisin bread. It's about 30 minutes since I took the bread out of the oven. Now I can slice the bread easily. I'm making chicken sandwich for lunch today with salad. Easy meal while we work from home during this COVID-19 pandemic. The bread is still warm and the home-baked bread tastes a lot better than the store-bought. I like this bread because the inside is moist and soft with crusty texture outside. This is the raisin bread my son and I like to eat and snack in between meals. I bake bread almost daily and I hope you will try baking it too. It's very easy to make and it tastes great. Happy baking!